Hello team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prabh, and today we're going to discuss about one of the hot topic nowadays in cloud security and data governance is data sovereignty and data residency. As a CISO, as an information security consultant, you must be familiar with this particular term because when you're dealing with the cloud provider, when you're drafting a contract, when you're managing a cloud security governance, it is very important for you to be familiar with this topic, and that is why I'm here with this particular topic. In this particular video, we're going to discuss about what is data sovereign and residency, what is the difference, how the data governance works in sovereign and residencies, and how to draft contract, what is the repercussions, what is the security aspects we need to consider. So let's start with the first part. My name is Prabh Nair, and for more information, do check my LinkedIn profile. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting a time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. So let's first discuss about the introduction. So data residency and data sovereignty are two important concepts that organizations need to consider when organizations storing a data. Data residency refer to the physical location of a data, while data sovereignty refer to the law and regulation that govern the data. Let's take one common example, and from that point of view, I'm going to explain that. Suppose this is basically, we have a Europe region, and we have a company here, okay, which basically doing a business in Europe. Okay, so this is basically data center services. So they're dealing with some customers in Europe. Okay. So according to the GDPR requirement and all that, we need to protect the data according to GDPR requirement. And according to that, data is basically reside in EU. Okay, but the question is, data is reside in EU, but data will be protected according to what regulations? So if the data reside in EU, according to GDPR is applicable, right? That is there. But if the data is basically stored in US, if the data basically stored in India, if the data is basically stored in Canada, okay, data belong to European but reside in Canada. So we want to ensure data even going outside of EU, it should be protected according to the GDPR. This is basically where we introduce the data sovereign concept. Okay, no matter my European data goes anywhere. Okay, if data is going to be stored in US, it should not be protected according to US regulation. It should be protected according to the EU regulation. But that's something we need to bring in the contract. We can't assume because default it should be protected according to the US regulation. So data residency, where the company that collect data about its customer in the European Union may choose to store data in the data center in the EU. This is where the data is physically located in the EU, where it is subject to the GDPR. And GDPR is a comprehensive law that set out the strict rules for the collection, storage, and processing of the personal data. This means that company would legally obligated to protect the data from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, or destruction. However, the company may also choose to store data in the data center in United States. This would mean the data is physically located in the US, where the subject to US law is there. So US does not have a comprehensive data protection law like a GDPR. This means the company would not legally obligated to protect the data to the same extent if it's stored in the EU. This is basically where we need to bring up contractual parameters in the contract. And this is basically the data sovereign come into the picture, where we want to protect the data according to the EU requirement. Is it clear? So that is a thin line difference between the data sovereign and data residency. So first we start with the basics of data residency. So data residency is referred to the physical location of data. This means data residency is concerned with where the data is physically stored in data center. Data residency is important for the organization that need to ensure data is available to the user in different location. Now let's take an example. We have India. India is basically taking a services from one of the company. This company basically have a presence in US, presence in Bangladesh, presence in Pakistan, and presence in Sri Lanka. So this user basically traveled to Sri Lanka, and from there he want to access the content. Now every time he has to request the content from the local India server. So company has a global presence, so they decided to have a copy of data in Sri Lanka, copy of the data in Pakistan, copy of the data in Bangladesh, copy of the data in US. So according to the data residency, it should be protected according to US, according to Bangladesh, according to Pakistan, according to Sri Lanka. But this is basically where I want a sovereignty, that no matter data goes wherever, it should be protected according to the India regulation. See, data residency was advantage where the data goes reside in any particular country and all that. From there, it is easy for the user to access the content like OTT platforms and all that. Netflix is the best example. They basically build the content according to US law, but they publish in all the local CDN server in other countries because the demand of the content is basically very high. Because of the cloud and dynamic CDN in nature, this concept came into the picture. So we have an example here, the organization that user in a multiple countries may need to store data in a multiple location to ensure user can access it quickly and easily. And this is how the data residency is basically defined. So until unless you don't define the regulation of data residency, they will protect according to their local regulations only. Is it clear? And same example I give here is company that collect data from user in EU may need to store data in EU to comply with the GDPR. This means company would need to use a cloud provider that has a data center in the EU, because in some countries data residency is very strict. You cannot move data outside of the country. Example, China. In China, we have a strict law regarding data privacy. In EU, GDPR is basically strict privacy. They basically ensure they can only move data to that country which equivalent to providing a data protection according to the GDPR requirement. In countries like Australia, countries like Canada, their data protection level is equal to GDPR. That is where they allow you to process the data from the other part of the country. Okay, so until unless you don't bring the contractual parameter about data sovereignty, it will be protected according to the local regulation of that country. So let's move to discuss about the data sovereignty. So here is a scenario. Data is subject to the law and regulation of the country in which it is stored. This means the government of that country has a right to access control the data regardless of who own and collect it. That is why we need to ensure the data wherever it go, it need to be protected according to the local law of the country. So GDP required the personal data of EU to be stored within a EU. Chinese government has a strict law governing the storage and processing of data within a China, and these law give the government broad power to access and censor the data. So you can imagine. Now just imagine is you have a data in India. Okay, so there is a company which basically dealing with the Indian data. And now what happened? This company moving a data in China. So they have a data center in China. So according to the China law, they can use your data because data is coming to their territory. Okay. So they have a data residency, which is basically China border. Now we need to check whether China government can use my data. The data is belong to India, but now data is going to their territory. For them, it's a national threat. What kind of a data is coming to their country? So China will ensure that, okay, they can have access to data, where the Indian government want to ensure that no one should misuse the data. So this is basically where you bring the contract. Understood? So no matter if the company moving data to China, it should be protected according to the India regulation. So this is what is a data sovereign clause you introducing. Okay, data residency mean here is data reside in India, so it should be protected according to India. But if the data goes to China, it should be protected according to China. It should be governed according to China, because they don't want to store any data which can compromise their national threats. So that is why they want to access your data. And this is what you don't want that. That is why France and Germany, they passed the law requiring a cloud provider to store data within their border only, because they know once the data go out of China or once the data go out of the country, anyone can basically misuse the data. Is it clear? So this is why we have bring one example here from the IBM website, how the data governance works. Now here, the first priority is the privacy. So data cannot be accessed by the operator according to the privacy parameter. Then we introduce a residency. It means data will be reside in a particular area. And by that, the local government can able to process the data. But until unless you don't sovereign that, anyone can basically misuse the data. That is why you're introducing a compliance regulations, so that you want to ensure data should be comply with the regulations. Data only subject to the local legal regulations. You know, the physical infrastructure must be meet the local ownership requirement. Proactive intrusion monitoring is required. So this is basically called as a sovereign, which is an edge of your data location. Is it clear? So data reside in India, but it doesn't mean that, okay, it will protect according to India. We need to ensure data should be protected according to India. That is why we introduce a data sovereign clause. Is it clear? So that is how we are defining the parameter. Now next part, when you're talking about the data sovereignty, so we have some benefits. Okay, so some benefit of data sovereignty is like national security. So data sovereignty can help to protect national security by giving a government control over its sensitive data. This cannot be important for the countries that are concerned about cyber warfare or terrorism. Second is privacy. So data sovereignty basically helps to protect the individual privacy by ensuring that data is subject to the law of the country in which it is stored. This can be important for the countries that have a strong privacy law. And third is economic development. So data sovereignty can also promote economic development by attracting businesses that are looking to store their data in a countries with a strong data protection law. So we know very well GDPR is known for the strong data protection law. Live example, Swiss bank. People basically keep their money in a Swiss bank because of the known privacy. Understood? Example like I am in India. I want to ensure that, okay, my financial data privacy need to be maintained. So I open the account in Swiss bank. So based out in India, creating an account in a Swiss bank, because I know the law of that country is very strict. They cannot share information like that, and bank is compliant with the regulation. So that is what is called as a data sovereignty, where the data is protected according to the Swiss law. Is it clear? But along with that, it also brings lot of challenges. Okay, the first challenge is basically called as a cost. Definitely target country, if they're trying to protect the data according to your local law or their local law, expensive. It is very expensive. So it may require business to store data in a multiple location. Second is basically compliance. So business that operate in a multiple countries, they need to be comply with each country, and this can be complex and time consuming process. And third is basically called as a security. So data sovereignty can make it more difficult to protect data from unauthorized access. It may be spread across a multiple locations. Now example like we have a data here. So according to cloud, we have a data diversification process where one copy of a data will be in Singapore, one copy of a data will be in Australia, and one copy of a data is basically in India. So here the data will be locally protected according to India law, Australia and Singapore law. So any point of time, any kind of a case was registered against a particular country, that government has a complete right to seize the particular disk also, and they can basically retrieve all the data. So that is a security issue we have. That's why in the cloud, we are using the concept of data diversification, where we don't store data in a one particular data center. We divide the data into small block and store in a multiple locations. So even a Singapore law and Singapore government want to retrieve the disk, they can only retrieve the partial data, and from there it is difficult for them to recreate the data. Is it clear? So data residency is local, but data when it move to other locations, their local law will be applicable, or if you want to apply your law, you need to amend in the contract, because that is what is all about data sovereign as a concept. Sovereign as a concept means power of authority, how you basically control. So you need to bring that in a contract. But when you're talking about the factors, okay, that business may consider when deciding on data residency and sovereignty is the first is law and regulation of a country where they operate. So example like you have decided, okay, you want to move data, you want to use a cloud provider. Let's take example. You need to first understand, do they have a local storage in India? Do they have a local storage in UAE? Because if they don't have a local zone in India, they have to move data outside of India. Is it secure? Can we move this kind of a data? So as a CISO, as a security consultant, we need to understand where they basically operate. Recently, there's a lot of clashes happen regarding the Chinese applications, Chinese phones, collecting Indian data and all that. And they're storing a data in China data centers and all that. So these things need to be reviewed. Second is need of the customer. What is the need of your customer? Is your customer need is availability, or the customer need is basically confidentiality? Okay, so that is another important thing. So they have a need called confidentiality, or they have a need of integrity, or they have a need of confidentiality or availability. If they have more focus on availability and we are not holding any kind of data and all that, we are primarily more on services, we can have a cloud provider which has availability in multiple locations. Example, I'm planning to start a OTT services. Okay, I have a global customer, and the kind of a content we have, it is not linked with any privacy. So it is okay to have a data center in multiple locations. And we also ensure that, okay, we will protect the data. We will not store any content which can breach their particular country law. Example, like now you have building some content which is romantic and all that, but it is banned in Middle East, example. So we have to respect the law of the land there. So that is why if you notice, some of the OTT platform doesn't work in Middle East. Some of the OTT platform doesn't work in outside of India, because of the data sovereign requirement, because in that particular country, that service is basically banned. Understood? WhatsApp call is available in India, but it is banned in other countries. So this is how the need of your customer you need to understand. Then the cost of data storage and processing. Okay, they are okay to invest money. So we can have a multiple storage in a different locations, and according to that, they pay the cost. But they are very concerned about the cost. They are not having a budget and all that. So according to that, we can have a one server in a India itself, and it should be protected according to the India regulations. Another important thing we have to see is availability of the cloud computing services. Okay, so how it is available. Okay, and we also need to see if the data is going to be stored in multiple locations. Because of availability, it compromises the confidentiality. Because now the data is stored in China, it is stored in Singapore, it is stored in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India. So they have a control over our data. So data breach and cyber attacks need to be understood. Ultimately, it is the business owner call to decide how they want the data to be diversified. Okay, and according to that, we can basically take a call. So as a CISO, as an information security officer, we need to consider some information security practices. The first is called as the data breach. So if you are in India and you're moving data to Singapore or China or Mongolia, you need to understand first, if the data is stored in a country with a weak data protection law, it may be more vulnerable to data breach. This is because the government or other entities may have a easier access to your data, and there may be fewer regulations governing how the data is stored. So data breach need to be reviewed, data privacy law, data protection law need to check. Second is, if the data is basically stored in a country with a high risk of cyber attack, it may be more vulnerable to be an attack. And this is because the infrastructure in this country may be less secure, or maybe more skilled hacker operating in these countries. And third is basically compliance. If business that operate in multiple countries may need to be comply with the data residency and data sovereign requirement of each country, this can be a complex and time consuming process. So it may require business to store data in multiple locations. So all these parameters need to be considered when you basically deciding a data sovereign and data residency. So businesses should be carefully consider all the factors when making a decision about data residency and data sovereignty. So before you basically decide to go over data sovereign requirement, you need to understand some security control parameter. So this is some of the best practice we have by which you can enhance the cloud security while maintaining a data sovereignty. First important thing is that choose the reputable cloud service provider. So select the CSP that comply with local data protection and privacy regulation, and ensure the CSP has a strong security framework, certification, and transparent data handling process. So in this case, you can ask for the SOC 2 report, ask for SOC 1 report, ISO, then you have your CSA reports. So by this way, you can able to provide the visibility. Second is understand the data location and storage. Know where your data will be physically stored. Some CSP have a data center in multiple countries, so allowing you to choose the desired location and ensure the chosen location align with the data sovereign requirement of your organization. Third is always store the data in an encrypted state, but key should be local. So is a customer here, you basically use key to encrypt the data, and then you move the encrypted data in the cloud. So tomorrow if the cloud breach happen and hacker has access to your data, he can only have access to your encrypted data. So make sure implement the strong encryption of your data both in transit and at rest. And encryption basically ensure if unauthorized access occur, the data remain unreadable and unusable. On a regular basis, you need to check your access control, how the access control has been implemented, because access control is basically the way you can able to maintain the data movement. You can have a multi-factor authentication, you can have a role-based access control, you can have a regular access review to ensure only authorized individual can access to the data. Along with that, you can have a data backup and recovery where you can keep a backup in the alternate location. Okay, make sure you should classify the data. You can decide what kind of a data you want to move in the cloud and what kind of a data you can have on-prem, but make sure you have a visibility. That's the most important thing that we need to consider. Okay, so classify data based on a sensitivity and implement the appropriate security measure, and segregate your sensitive data from a less sensitive data and restrict the access based on a classification. Along with that, you can also check for the incident response and monitoring, where you can implement the a robust incident response plan to promptly address any security incidents and monitor your cloud environment for any unusual activities. Then, before you onboard a vendor for cloud services, perform the proper due diligence checks. Review regularly review and assess your CSP security practices, including the compliance with the data protection regulation. You can ask for the PIA report, privacy impact assessment report. Stay updated on your latest security vulnerabilities. And last but not the least, contractual agreements. That's a very important thing. Okay, make sure everything need to be amended in the contract. Let me show you the sample of the contract so you get a better visibility. So this is basically called as a sample contract, which is designed according to data sovereignty. In the first part, you need to add the company letterhead where you mention about the cloud service provider name and address. Suppose in my case, the cloud provider is AWS. And then you talk about the cloud data security service sovereignty contract. That will be the subject. And then you can give the name of the service provider, which is called AWS. So then you basically define the services. Like example, this letter serve as a proposal to establish a contractual agreement between your company. So your company is basically aspirant, okay, and cloud service provider AWS, okay, for ensuring data sovereignty and data security. So purpose of the contract is to outline the responsibility and obligation of both party. So in this contract, we also set the criteria as a cloud consumer. What is my responsibility and what is basically the responsibility of the cloud provider. Second part in the contract, we need to add the scope of services. What kind of a services you want to host in the cloud. Okay, so here the CSP shall provide the cloud service to client according to SLA. So SLA is part of a contract and we ensure the physical logical security. So this is very important to define the scope of services. Okay, it's very important. Then the another important article we need to add is called as a data sovereign. So here we can see the CSP acknowledge, agree all data owned or managed by client, store within a cloud infrastructure, remain within the geographical boundaries. So here you can define the location. CSP shall not transfer stored client data outside the approval jurisdiction without obtaining prior written consent. So that also we need to define. Then you can see here the data protection security, very, very important. And this area you can basically modify according to your requirement. Here I have mentioned some requirement like CSP shall implement technical measures. CSP should ensure the all data transmission storage within a cloud. CSP maintain up-to-date security controls regularly. So these are the list of activities. These are a list of service level requirement you are expecting from a cloud provider. Is it clear? And if you are dealing with GDPR, you need to notify the data breach in 72 hours. If you are in the India regulation, you need to report the data breach in 6 hours. That's something you can amend here. Then you talk about the access control. Then we have a compliance regulation. This is a very, very important part. Make sure you should have a strong awareness when you're drafting this article. You can ensure what kind of a regulation you want to comply, or you also want to ensure what is your data localization requirement. Okay. If the cloud provider having a subcontractor, make sure the services and security should be offshore to the contractor also in the same way. You can also define the data retention deletion, how long he need to retain the data. And you also need to come with the indemnification clause. It's a very important clause. Is it clear? And then we're talking about the termination. Then we talk about the law and jurisdiction. This is basically different from the content. This is completely different from the data regulation of privacy. In this basically mean if anything happen which is going against this contract, according to which country the dispute will need to be solved. So sometime what happened, cloud provider try to pitch their local country regulations, but sometime the customer is basically requesting to be resolve the dispute according to their particular country regulation. Make sure you should be very, very clear when it comes to the law and jurisdiction, when it comes to the resolving the contract issues. Is it clear? So that's something we have to check. Always we look for the international law, and according to that we basically protect the contract. Then you're talking about your name, position and company name, and this is basically the service provider and need to be signed. So this is how we basically prepare the draft contract for your cloud data security sovereignty. This is all from my side, part of my GRC series. Do let me know how do you find this video, and do let me know what kind of a content shall I make on the next GRC series. This is all from my side, and thank you so much for showing your love toward my videos. And if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. Good day. Bye.